Welcome to this special webinar organized in collaboration between Thinking Football Summit and the Football Business Academy. I've been told more than 100 people pre-registered, and it's so great to have the opportunity to share my thoughts and perspectives on what football clubs can do to internationalize. As such, I just want to sincerely thank the whole team at Thinking Football Summit and our partners Liga Portugal for considering me and for coordinating everything very professionally behind the scenes, and especially for creating these kinds of learning opportunities for the global football community. So before we begin, let's maybe just a quick background on who I am. So my name is Kristian Dobrev. I am 35 years old, originally from Bulgaria, grew up in Belgium, and currently living in the sunny Mallorca, Spain. I have a bachelor in business management and sports management, which means I've only and ever worked in the football industry. And for the past 7 years, I've been working with the Football Business Academy as co-founder and deputy CEO. And yeah, what can I say? Throughout my life, I've traveled to 50 countries, many of them multiple times. And one thing is very clear to me is that football is everywhere. I'm sure that is not new information for a lot of you guys, but it is something that is still very special if you think about it. Anywhere you go in the world, you can connect with someone regarding this beautiful game that is football. And as part of my role at the FBA, me and my team have been in charge of developing and servicing over 80 partnerships with many football clubs, leagues, federations, agencies, and so on from all around the world. And one thing we've noticed is that among the partners and the things that we collaborate on, there's been a lot of focus on internationalization. And then we do that through internships, through student business projects, through content and visibility, talent pooling, events, and many other things. And so thanks to our own international reach and community, I've learned and observed many things, good and not so good. So my objective for today's webinar is to try and share my main insights that I've developed over the years, thanks to these interactions and the conversations that I've had with top football executives. We won't be able to go too deep down the rabbit hole due to time, but hopefully it'll provide you with a useful framework through which you can analyze your own internationalization efforts or prepare for them if it's something you're thinking of working on in the future. All right, so that's the introduction. Let's begin. We're looking at this beautiful world map now. Of course, we're talking about internationalization. And as was the case for many other industries, the real possibilities of internationalizing a football club started to grow exponentially, I would say around 25 years ago. And now, in my opinion, we've reached peak opportunity, which is a concept I will come back to towards the end of my session. Before that, so before the 90s, essentially, with very few exceptions, most football clubs, they were very focused on the local environment, as there were still many things to improve and develop and grow domestically, which made a lot of sense. But then as developments in technology accelerated, of course, with the rise of internet, with broadcast technology, with social media and various tech platforms, it made the world more and more interconnected. And I think this is the key point which led to the possibility of internationalizing more and more. And so as this evolution happened, I think a lot of clubs realized that they had thousands, if not millions of fans around the world who also wanted to connect and be closer to the team and the players that they love and do so on a much more frequent basis than was possible ever before. And so they want more access to live games, to content, to experiences, to different products and other ways of showing that they also have this loyalty and fandom that the local fans also, of course, have. And then the challenge and the opportunity for football clubs, in my opinion, is to find the right approach between the local and the global demands, from fans and sponsors to strategic partners, owners, governing bodies, media, etc. There's so many different stakeholders that have different interests, different needs. And for a football club nowadays, especially if they want to internationalize, it's important to make sure that it's not just a copy-paste with what has worked in the local environment, but actually try and adapt it to the global environment as well, which that by itself means going locally with each country that you try to tackle. So let's go through some concepts that, in my opinion, can make a huge difference. And for me, the most important thing here is that internationalization, despite the word, it starts at home. Before thinking about which markets you may want to target, before thinking about what kind of fan engagement and revenue opportunities there may be, you first need to start by getting your house in order as a club so that you can be fully prepared and as a consequence be more effective. Everyone at the club should be on board and understand why it's an important part of the club's strategy. And critically, I think both the business and the sports departments of the club need to be aligned. They need to collaborate genuinely and effectively. If not, it's a recipe for disaster more often than not. So it means that the players and the coaching staff and everyone around them need to understand why doing international projects helps the club to engage more fans, to generate more revenue, and realizing that at the end of the day, most of that revenue goes to their salaries and transfer budgets, right? So in many clubs, for better or worse, out of every incremental euro or dollar they generate, about 70% typically goes to transfers and player salaries. So that's a huge chunk, right? And so the sports side, they need to understand that in many cases, it's very difficult to increase the revenues from the local market because, if you already sell out your stadium, there's only so much that you can do to increase the revenues there or put higher ticket prices, which of course we know that the local fans don't always appreciate. Sponsorship rights, again, the local market sometimes can be saturated. So the real opportunity is internationally. On the other side, the business department of a club also needs to understand that there are certain limitations, right? And so where relevant, they need to be aware of them so that they don't overdo things or promise things that are hard to execute on or hard to control. Because we've all heard the stories, right, where angry fans and promoters were told that the club's key players that were supposed to join on the tour ended up not coming and not playing. And I think that in many cases, these issues can be avoided as long as there's a healthy dialogue, there's trust, there's an honest approach to doing business. And so equally, the business department should also think about the pressure on the players caused by extensive travel or higher workload and commitments, being away from families, and of course, health considerations. All these things are very delicate subjects and need to be balanced well to avoid issues not only during the preseason when a lot of the internationalization efforts take place, but of course during the entire season as well, which a lot of internationalization efforts take place during the season. And so oftentimes, this is where internationalization projects don't succeed to the extent that they could, which means that, if there's too much friction or tension between the sports and the business side of a club, it will always be an uphill battle and it will cause frustration on all sides. And so to mitigate this, I believe that there's two key elements, which are communication and mindset. Now let's go through all of those two. The first one, communication, I'm going to separate into two, internal communication and external, and both have an equal importance. The internal communication, of course, it starts by changing the culture, which is hard, but it's not impossible, right? It requires leadership. It requires a healthy and collaborative approach so that everyone is on the same page and respects the opinions and comments of the others. And so here, there's no room for ego. There's no room for patronizing the others. Everyone should have a voice and be heard, and then the top management should take the final decisions. And importantly, once that decision has been made, all the others should embrace that decision and not whine about it, that it didn't go their way this time, because people, they will feel that resentment and it won't do the club any good. So the internal communication, I think, is where it all starts. Once you align everyone internally and they understand why it's important to the club, then it should be easier to go to the next step. And the next step in the communication side, of course, is also the external communication. And what I mean by that, more often than not, is to communicate to the local fans why it's also important to give the global fans the chance to feel as being part of the club. This, again, is sometimes a delicate conversation, because there's cases where the local fans have a sense of entitlement and they don't like it when their club steps outside of the box. So here again, depending on each club situation, you have to know what kind of fans you have, what kind of relationships that you have with them or don't have with them yet. and clubs should take time to really engage with them and make the local fans also realize that international fans are part of the family. They're also very passionate about their club, and they also help the club to be bigger and better in different ways. So having the approach to the internal and the external communication, I think, is crucial. And then once you have that, it of course also goes down to mindset, right? Which is the second key element that I mentioned. And what I mean by mindset, obviously, there's so many things that come to mind. But first and foremost, I think it's the importance of creativity and authenticity. And the reason why is that a lot of times I've observed clubs that they start their internationalization project just by copying what others have done, which to some degree I can understand. It makes sense. Why reinvent the wheel when you see that others have done so successfully? But you also have to think outside the box, and it can mean different things for you as a club, and there's different ways that you can go about it, right? So it's important to be creative, to think about what you as a club can uniquely bring to the table, even if it's never done before. And I think people will agree that there aren't that many clubs that are considered risk takers, for better or worse, of course. But in business, in startups, this is usually where the magic happens. Sure, sometimes you'll fail, but that's all right. And I think that if more clubs embrace this mindset of being creative, trying new things, having some risk, they'll actually come to realize that fans, who are usually the biggest critics, will come to embrace it and learn how to live with it. I think it's in human nature to resist change, but change is the only constant in evolution. And we've always seen that whenever there is something that initially caused a lot of quote unquote bad reaction, over time, people, they've accepted it and they've learned how to live with it. So I think if clubs have that mindset as well, they can actually step outside of their own comfort zone, which I think oftentimes is limited due to the fear of what the other people, and in particular the fans, might say. And then second is the importance of authenticity, because it's not just about the financial gain, right? Everyone knows that in the end, internationalization efforts are not done out of charity. There needs to be a result for the bottom line as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't be sustainable, which is key. But that doesn't mean that financial gain should necessarily be prioritized over authenticity, because fans and sponsors, they will see right through it, okay? And they will feel disrespected, maybe even lose trust with you and stop following you or stop willing to spend money with you, right? So it's about taking the time and having the reflections to ensure that authenticity and financial gain can go hand in hand. And if you do that, I think the sky's the limit. So, and then as a bonus for this section, I also just want to mention the importance of internationalization from within. Okay, we've dealt with many clubs at the FBA, and a lot of times what I see is that all the people working at the club are from that specific country, which I agree historically makes sense, and of course it should be the majority of a club. Otherwise, the local community would feel disenfranchised completely from what the purpose of the club is. But I also think that the other extreme of not having any foreigner makes sense, especially if the strategy is to internationalize. So too often, they will say, okay, let's internationalize, but then they'll pack their bags, they'll go to the other side of the world, and they don't know the culture, they don't know the people, they don't have the contact. So I think if people would start to internationalize within, which can be done through internships, could be done by hiring people that have the cultural sensibility, that have the language, that know the people, then you already are winning half of the battle, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you don't have to learn from costly mistakes or waste time on future projects. So I think this is a low-hanging fruit that many clubs are still not embracing fully, whereas it can make a big difference, in my opinion. So in that case, I think the communication and the mindset and making sure that you start from within are key to then starting to genuinely think about, okay, like what are the next steps after that? How do we actually think about what we want to do, right? And so what we want to do is much like a puzzle, right? There's so many different elements, so many different people that will be part of this. It's like creating a team on the pitch, right? But the difference is that you have to create that team off the pitch and make sure that they collaborate well and they have the right coach that can lead them to quote unquote victory. And so now that we've gone through the previous part, there's a few things that I think are very important that sometimes, again, clubs do very well, but oftentimes they don't think about it enough, which I think is not serving them any favor. So the first that comes to mind, of course, basic, is the mission and vision of the club. Okay, what's the purpose of the club? What does it want to be or become, and to whom? If you don't know that, how are you going to tell the story? How are you going to connect with the fans or the sponsors? So making sure that you know the mission and vision of the club, and that the people working at the club know it as well, is usually something that is overseen, but has such a big impact to really make a difference. Related to that are the values of the club. If you haven't defined the values as a club, how will you know which fans or partners you resonate with? More often than not, those important stakeholders, they want to know what you stand for and see that you mean it and are consistent with these values so that they can resonate with them. In turn, this creates a willingness for them to associate themselves with you, which opens the door to a mutually beneficial relationship. So make sure you take the time to define your values. Again, make sure that internally and externally, everyone knows about them, and make sure that you're consistent in applying those values as well. That way, you can win the hearts and trust of more people than you can imagine. Third is the positioning. And this concept, again, some clubs get very well, whereas others, they seem to be a little bit lost in this. And it's about knowing what the club is and what it isn't. Are you the favorite or are you the underdog? Are you a big local club? Are you a big global club? Are you a small local club or a small global club? All right, there's 4 different types of clubs, I would say, that you can distinguish yourself under. And it's very important to really think honestly and deeply about which one you are or can realistically aspire to be, okay? Wrexham, we're going to go back to them later. They may have the ambition to be a Premier League club. I wish them all the best, but maybe that's not their objective, right? So they know that they maybe want to be a small global club, small local impact, but global presence. And there's an important distinction to make. And once you've found your position, everything else usually becomes easier to think about and execute on. So once you have the mission and vision, you have the values, and you have the positioning, then that's when you can really start thinking about strategy. So think about all the previous steps that we've discussed. Only now do we start thinking about strategy. And to the outsider, it can often appear that not every club has a strategy. And why is this? It seems that decisions are made in a rush. They often seem irrational or unconsidered. And there seems to be no cohesive rationale and process through which the decision makers can go through and keep each other not only accountable, but to also keep each other on track. And I'm not only talking about decisions related to players or coaches, which are the most mediatized, but I'm also talking about the business side. It's very important to not only have a strategy, which means thinking about short-term, medium-term, and long-term objectives, which again is something that some clubs are good at, but many times a lot of clubs think only about the short term. But it's also about communicating those with everyone, okay? And creating a framework, creating guidelines, creating rules that everyone will follow, especially when things seem to be going bad, which is usually when things go bad on the pitch, right? How often have we seen clubs that they may have a strategy, but as soon as they lose 2 or 3 games, all that strategy goes out the window and people forget about why they implemented that strategy in the first place and why it's important to stick to the strategy and not make irrational decisions, right? I think this is a conception or a preconception that a lot of outsiders have about football clubs in general, for better or worse. So again, as a club, think about it. Like, what's your reality? Are you a club that is prone to throwing a strategy out the window just because the coach has lost a few games, or there's something isn't going as planned on the pitch? It's important to remind yourself why you put this particular strategy in place in the first place. Then once you have developed your strategy with the short, medium, and long-term objectives, you have to think about the human resources and the financial resources, all right? And I touched on this before, but if you don't have the right people working on internationalization, where are the results going to come from? They're going to come much, much harder, right? And so initially, these projects, they will require investment, maybe training, before seeing the results. So if the club has taken the decision that internationalization is important to them, then as a club, put your money where your mouth is and make sure that you have enough people that can execute against that strategy. The worst case scenario is where you have a super ambitious internationalization project, but you have only one person that is in charge of it. One person cannot, do everything. So you have to make sure that you give that person enough resources in terms of human capital to make sure that they can actually stand a chance at executing on the strategy, which brings me to the financial part. Often, clubs will want quick financial wins, but tell me one other industry where this is expected or even realistic when you start doing something new. First, you have to invest, and then you get to reap the results. And it's not that there isn't money in football clubs, right? There is money. It's just about having the best strategy on how to distribute that money and how to budget different things. I always think about the analogy where clubs will often negotiate a player transfer or compensation package with a few million more or less as if it's nothing. And they'll do that in a matter of minutes or hours as if it's nothing, right? Whereas on the business side, to validate a 200 euro or 5,000 euro expense, which oftentimes actually is an investment, not an expense, or a 40,000 euro salary, will be sweated and challenged for weeks, if not months. And this to me has always seemed very counterintuitive. And I think that a lot of clubs, if they really think deeply about it, they will realize that there's something wrong with this mindset and that it isn't conducive to letting the club truly thrive. So when combining the human resources and the financial resources element, of course, at the end of the day, the players need to be there, they need to be paid well, they are the stars, they are the performers, they attract everything else. But I think there are certain improvements in terms of the processes that can be made to make sure that the business side also gets valued in the right way and that it can really get the chance to succeed, basically, right? And I think these things are very important. And so finally, the other piece of the puzzle is, of course, the assets. You need to consider what kind of assets you have. Most of the time, this will mean the players. They especially, in most cases, they have the global appeal. They have a large following themselves. Of course, the fans, they relate to them. So you can consider the players' nationalities, their reach, their personalities, and this can also help guide your internationalization efforts, both on and off the pitch. And so you have to think about, okay, like how do you, quote unquote, leverage those assets? Of course, there's other assets as well that are part of this whole debate, including could be real estate, of course, a stadium and other ones. But there's also one asset class, if you can call it that, which I think is not always seen as such, but that I believe actually is, and this is the fans, okay? They are basically the club's most vocal ambassadors. They live and die for your club. They spend money for you. They don't expect any money in return. They just want to be part of your club. They want to be part of something. And so players will come and go, but fans, most often, they will remain with you for their entire life. And so I think if they can be embraced in a better way and treated as an asset as well, then that can open the door to both engagement and revenue opportunities that are unheard of if you only let them. So this is kind of like the puzzle of the strategy and what you have to think about. Then, of course, we have loads of examples, and I'm going to quickly run through a few just for those that haven't maybe seen that many. And of course, there's many more. And as I mentioned before, you have to be creative. You have to think outside the box. You can think about new things. But just a few examples here. So on the top left, we have restaurants and bars, right? A few months ago, I was in Mexico City, and I was walking, and I saw this bar and restaurant where it was done by Real Madrid. So people, they would gather there, watch games together when Real Madrid was playing. There was a fan shop. There were events. You could throw your birthday party there. You could do other things. And so this is a very unique way of respecting your Mexican fans and giving them an opportunity to stay connected to your club. Of course, other clubs do that through fan clubs maybe as well. But why not have your own quote unquote chain, whether owned or licensed, with your brand, with your apparel, with everything, so that you can really give your fans in different parts of the world a place where they can meet and talk about you and cheer for you. Okay. The second one is the camps and clinics. I think this is probably one of the most utilized ways of clubs internationalizing, because it's usually the most accessible or the easiest. At the end of the day, you just need to find a partner, you need to find a pitch, and find ways to attract some kids that want to learn your methodology, right? They want to get dressed in your uniform, they want to get coached for a week by some of your coaches, and that way, they can develop their skills and again, be part of the club. So this is something that I think has been done for many, many years. And of course, it can work very well, because at the end of the day, as a club, what you definitely also want to do, even if most of the times these camps and clinics are not that conducive to really finding the right talent that will come to your first team, but at least you can get the kids early on and they can become a fan. And if you engage with them in the right way, they can become a fan for life, and you can monetize that fan over their lifetime. Okay. Then the third one, as we also know, this is also a very common one, are the friendly matches and the tours, right? So this is something that especially the bigger clubs, but why not also some smaller clubs, have been doing over the past, I would say, 20 years. And this, again, is a great way to make sure that the fans in different parts of the world can have the chance to watch a game, because many of them, we have this example here of Manchester City going on the USA tour this summer. Many of their fans around the world, they will never get to go to Manchester, right? And so you have to also give them the opportunity from time to time to be close enough to a game, and they will enjoy it, they will respect you for it, they will spend money with you. And so I think it's another great way to do it, as long as you, again, coming back to my previous point, as long as you coordinate very well with the sporting department. Usually when tours or friendly games don't go well is because the sports and business departments haven't aligned enough, and so sometimes that can cause frustration. Okay. Then top right, you see the Barca legends and ambassadors. So there is one about thinking creatively. A lot of times when clubs think about how they can internationalize their activities, their brand, the first thing, of course, that comes to mind always is the current players, right? They're the big stars right now. They're the one that everyone wants to see and touch and interact with. But many clubs also have a good kind of like base of legends that are also, still very well respected and known around the world, maybe in different generations, but they have more time free, more time available. So sometimes, like Barca did with this friendly match in Colombia, it's another way of gathering the Barca fans that are living in Colombia, or maybe even the neighboring countries that maybe have never seen them play, because 20 years ago they didn't have the money to go to Barcelona or what have you. And so this is another way that football clubs can think about doing something outside of the box, not with their current key players, but why not with their legends? And so different clubs do that in different ways, but it's also a very powerful one. Then, of course, bottom left, we have the AS Roma Arabic channel on X, on Twitter. Obviously, a lot of clubs, especially the ones that know that they have many fans in different parts of the world, they know that it's become ever more important to make sure that they can communicate to their fans in their local language, which means opening up different social media channels in different languages, but also sharing more relevant content with them, right? It's not a copy-paste. Usually that's the biggest mistake that clubs or companies, for that matter, do, is when they just copy-paste the same content for all the different channels and all the different languages. You have to really take the time to understand what your, in this case, Arabic AS Roma fan is interested in and wants to see or hear, because it's not going to be the same as the guy sitting in Rome. Okay. And so you can also think about, targeted campaigns, even advertising, but obviously social media, everyone is on their mobile phones all day, every day. So this is definitely one that I think, again, a lot of clubs over the years have embraced it in the right way. But I think there's still room for improvement for certain clubs to do even more and even better. As we also know, different clubs have also opened up different offices around the world, again, to be closer to the people, to the partners, to the fans, and thereby being more proactive and reactive when opportunities arise. Okay, so in this picture, we have the Schalke 04 opening of the China office several years ago. And even there, different clubs have different strategies. For example, in the US, I know that Bayern Munich, they have their own office. They have a staff of, I think, about 10 to 20 people full-time working on not only USA, but also the rest of the Americas, trying to develop relationships with media, with sponsors, with fans, doing different activations. Whereas Borussia Dortmund, for example, what they've done in the USA is to go through an agency, in this case, Sport 5. They have a New York office branch. And so Borussia Dortmund is their client, and Sport 5, on behalf of Borussia Dortmund, develops the whole digital and activation strategy for the club in the country. So there's different ways of going about, foreign office representation. It's either direct, it's either through an intermediary, but depending on the club's interests and needs and how important specific markets are, you can go with different options, right? And of course, it's not a club, but in case of La Liga, the Spanish league, as many of you know, they have offices in probably 10, 15 different countries around the world. Plus, they have delegates in even more countries around the world who allow them to be closer to the different partners and stakeholders and to develop that relationship and making sure that in all these countries, La Liga stays top of mind, okay? Then the Welcome to Wrexham. I'm sure many of you have already heard about it at the minimum or watched it. But here again, it doesn't always have to be the big clubs that do everything. You can be a small club from Wrexham. Of course, I understand Ryan Reynolds has a global appeal, global image. But even if you're a small club, you can create a documentary, and as long as you do it in an authentic way and you create and share your own story, it can have a positive impact, and you can really reach a global audience with it and create new fans where you least expected them to, right? And then last but not least, we have the image of the pop-up stores. In this case, it's PSG in Korea. So they sometimes open up pop-up stores in key markets. So there as well, it's about bringing different concepts. It's about giving the fans internationally as well access to different products. It's not about only the same things that you will sell in the Paris megastore, but it's about customizing some designs and experiences that the local fans would appreciate, right? So these are just kind of like 8 key examples that I wanted to highlight. Of course, there's other ones, with partnerships. I think about, for example, Real Mallorca, the club here where I live. They have a Japanese sponsor. And instead of making the sponsor, come to Mallorca every time, they also regularly go to Japan. They take a few of their players with them. They take time to really, engage with the sponsors, with the fans. And, maybe they don't have the means to open up an office or to do things that a Real Madrid or a Barca can do, but they find kind of like their own way of what makes sense for them and based on the budget and the human resources that they have, right? Then, of course, you have all kinds of licensing and merchandising opportunities. You have the broadcast rights, the OTTs, the digital channels, even the stadium tour, right? If you have a nice stadium with a nice stadium tour, maybe even a museum, if you live in a city, if your club is based in a city that gets a decent amount of tourism throughout the year, why not making sure that people, when they arrive to the airport, they know that you're there, they know that you exist. They say, this looks interesting, I'm going to check it out. I'm a football fan, I'm going to do the tour of the stadium. Maybe I'll buy something, maybe I'll tell my friends about it, I'll take a few pictures, post them on my social media. These are also ways of internationalizing your club, which I think some clubs, again, do very well. I think about, for example, Sevilla. Whenever we go to Sevilla, right in the airport, you see Betis and Sevilla with their different activation, so that people know that apart from seeing the beautiful sights of Sevilla, which is an amazing city, they also are reminded that there's 2 very historic and successful football clubs that people can visit, okay? There's, of course, fan tokens, there's NFTs, there's mobile apps, there's e-commerce, there's so many different additional ways that clubs can internationalize, again, if they only take time to look at them in a genuine way, and again, make sure that it's not just a copy-paste of what works at home. Okay, I think this is crucial. And so these examples, they're not only for European clubs, by the way, who go to other continents, although that seems to be historically, or for the past 20 years at least, the vast majority of internationalization efforts. But it's also internationalizing within Europe. I think also a lot of clubs, they underestimate how much potential there is to do certain things within Europe, which is closer to home. I'm thinking about Athletic Club de Bilbao, for example, who, because of their UK roots, they recently went to the UK and interacted there with different clubs and stakeholders to kind of like value that relationship and that historic route that they have. Okay, and I think also over the years and possibly more so in the future, non-European clubs, they will also go to play in Europe or other parts of the world where there are significant diasporas of people that follow their clubs, right? So I think until now, a lot of European clubs have done the bulk of the internationalization efforts, but why not, I don't know, have a Boca Juniors game being played in Italy where there's, a lot of interconnected football culture because of guys like Maradona, right? So this is just an interesting, I think, overview of what other clubs have done. Of course, the purpose of this webinar is not to go too deep into all of them, but I just wanted to give the overview so that especially people that maybe hadn't heard of certain things can take them on board and think about them in more detail and maybe look at best practices after this webinar. Okay. And then my last slide, which I think is also very important to finish on, is the importance of data, and by extension, the importance of having very good fan relationship management system. It's about truly knowing your fan, okay? Both the one around the corner in your domestic market, but also, of course, the global ones. And it's being able to personalize your marketing and communication campaigns depending on their demographics, their purchasing power, their habits, everything. Everything is trackable, right? And so I think brands, they have become much more sophisticated in their demands, and clubs need to keep up. I think it was only 5 years ago when a fairly important European club that we interacted with, that the people in their marketing team didn't even know what a CRM system is. Okay, that was 5 years ago. So imagine how many clubs hopefully are using those, but how many clubs are still behind in really having a centralized CRM or FRM system that is really powerful to make sure that they have the right data and they can customize it. I think a lot of times, for better or worse, again, clubs, they have their database, they send the same message to everyone, but they don't know that maybe Juan is living in Colombia and he cannot come to Madrid for a game, so why sell him tickets, right? Maybe you have to sell him something else or communicate in a different way. And so I think, it's no longer enough to brag about how many followers you have on Facebook or whichever social media you put on your slide deck, which, by the way, I think many of those follower accounts are questionable. I think everyone that has been enough on those platforms know that a lot of times there's bots, there's kind of like fake accounts, right? So I think a lot of those figures are inflated anyway. And so I think brands are, seeing through it if you can only show numbers without actually showing how many fans and you have specific data on, right? What can you prove to actually know about them, right? And so coming back to my comment before about the fact that, in my opinion, we've reached peak opportunity, it comes from the context that clubs nowadays are in the best possible situation possible to take advantage of the opportunities. There are no more excuses. Everything and everyone is within reach. There are all the technological platforms that you can think of to make the most of every opportunity. And all things considered, they're not even that expensive, right? Everything is about contextualizing it. It's about realizing the opportunity cost and then doing the right thing. And after that, I think the sky's the limit. So with that, let's take some questions. I hope you enjoyed it. And let's see, the first question: is the language something to consider when choosing a market to expand? For example, Brazil, Portugal, England, US. So we've touched on language before. I think it definitely is important. I'm lucky enough to speak many languages, which has helped me and the FBA to internationalize more effectively, because it means that you can speak to the person in their common language. So if you're a club, let's say from Portugal, naturally you have a historic tie to Brazil, so that's a very obvious, I would say, market to look to. But it doesn't have to be the only one, right? But what I would recommend is that whichever market you go to, make sure that you have people that understand that language, understand the culture, because usually when things go wrong is because there's a mismatch between the culture and the language. Okay, so thank you for that question. Hope I answered it. Then another one from Michael: is there a risk for a club to lose its identity in a process of internationalization? If so, how can we prevent it? I think this is a very important question. I think it's something that probably a lot of clubs will think about before making any decisions. Probably as well because they either experienced or have seen fans react negatively to certain clubs when they've tried to internationalize, right? So, but again, if you take a step back and you go to the previous to the initial part that I mentioned, as long as you make sure that everything is communicated in the right way, internally and externally, then I think that sets you up to make sure that everyone knows what is your identity. And then as long as you don't lose that identity when you go to internationalize, there's no reason why it should be a risk. Again, of course, you want to make sure that you then adapt to each market, but at the end of the day, coming back to the mission and the vision and the values and the positioning, if you have a fan or if you develop a fan, it's because your identity will be something that resonated with them, right? So don't try to be a club, a certain type of club domestically and a completely different type abroad, because that doesn't work. Nowadays in social media, everyone can see transparently what is happening everywhere. So as long as you define your identity, you communicate it correctly, once you internationalize, people will know what you stand for, and so it wouldn't be a risk, in my opinion, if you take that consistent approach. Then the next question: what's your opinion about the internationalization process that is happening in Saudi Arabia? So that's a good question. So first of all, you have to consider that Saudi Arabia is internationalizing. Of course, they want to become one of the biggest leagues in the world, and they want to do that by attracting great players, great coaches, and continue to develop their local football culture, right? Which they already had. I was there in December, and I had a chance to watch a game by Al Ittihad, and I was amazed by the fans and how loud they were, and they were, singing and shouting the whole game. So I think a lot of misconceptions, first of all, exist about Saudi Arabia, and usually when I travel, I always try to not think about any stereotypes that people or society or the media has imposed upon me. I always try to go with an open mind. So first of all, I would recommend people to go to those different places themselves and realize for themselves, what is going on and how the culture is, because that's also something that is very important, even more so in the case of Saudi, which only until recently, was pretty close, let's say, to the outside world, and only in the past 5 years, which is nothing, has really started to open up, right? So, so I think they have a vision, right? They have a very bold and ambitious vision, of course. We also all know that they will host the 2034 FIFA World Cup, right? So they're working towards that as well. And I think you have to give them some time to see how it develops. I think, again, going back to one of my previous comments, you have to have short, medium, and long-term objectives, and you have to have KPIs against them, right? So I think it's still too early in the process to really be able to evaluate it fully. I think it will take time because not only do you do something that has never been done before at that scale. The closest that came to it, I think, was maybe China before COVID, maybe to some degree the USA after the World Cup '94. But even there, I think there were completely different cultural and infrastructural challenges. So I think with Saudi, I think we will see over time where it leads to. But I was actually just speaking to a friend from Europe that went to Saudi a few months ago, and he told me that of course things are different, the mentality is different, the way of working is different. So if you want to internationalize to Saudi or with Saudi, you have to be aware of that, right? You have to have the cultural sensitivity. You have to make sure that you take the time to develop those relationships. You have to show that you're authentic, that you're not just a money grabber, right? And so I think over time, let's see what happens. But I'm looking forward to see how it plays out. There's a lot of players and coaches that have went there. A few have come back. I think so far, the big effort as well that they've had to do is of course on the media rights and making sure that people outside of Saudi are also showing interest in the league and are following it, which I think, again, it takes time. It cannot be expected that just in 1 year or 2 years, suddenly everyone will make it a habit to follow the Saudi Pro League. But I think over time, if they continue to invest, if they continue to have the right governance structure and to create an attractive product, people will come. And if not, they will leave. The next question, do you believe that the next Club World Cup in 2025 will help boost the international recognition of Brazilian teams' brands, for example? And do games like EAFC have an impact on this international brand expansion? All right, another very interesting two-sided question. So obviously the Club World Cup, for those that don't know, is going to take a different format from next year. Until last year, it used to be like a small event where the winner of each continent's Champions League basically gathered together to play the final in a different location, right? And so from next year, there will be a full-on tournament with, I think it's 32 clubs from all the different confederations, where they will play during roughly 1 month in the United States, okay? So given the fact that the Club World Cup organized by FIFA will bring together so many important clubs from all over the world, just think about it as from a football fans perspective, they will naturally want to watch it, right? It's going to be the top players, the top clubs, and I think they will find it interesting because for the first time ever, really, you're going to have games where the top European clubs will play against top African clubs, but doing it so much more than just one single game, right? So it's going to be more of a World Cup format, which I think generates more excitement. And so I think for the Brazilian teams that qualified, knowing that the Brazilian teams generally are very good at developing talent, and they're very passionate football fans, I think on TV this will be reflected, and people they will get connected to the Brazilian teams as well, maybe start following them, maybe even get an idea that maybe they should go to Brazil and visit the club, or maybe start following the clubs online, etc. So you never know. It was only recently that, again, on the back of a previous Club World Cup, I think it was like a person from Japan started following a Mexican club. I think it was Pachuca. We were there a couple of weeks ago, and so just because Pachuca played in a Club World Cup a few years ago, this guy he went to the game and he became a fan, and he kept following the club. So I think for the Brazilian teams, it's definitely possible. And then regarding your question about EAFC, so there as well, I was actually talking with them recently. We have a good friend that is working at EAFC as senior marketing manager. And so they have a very ambitious strategy as well for the next 5 years, which I think, they're only just really getting started on. But basically they have now roughly 250 active users, and they want to increase that to 1 billion in 5 years. All right. So it's, again, very ambitious goal, but they really want to become more than a game. They want to become a platform for the football community. And so I think by nature of their game and the popularity of the game, a lot of kids, they start following football because of the game. And so I think EAFC will play a very interesting and important role to allow clubs and leagues and competitions from around the world to also internationalize. Because imagine a kid buys EAFC in South Korea, never watched an actual football game, but buys the game, starts playing with it, and then as a result of that, talks with his friends, online or physical, and starts following a certain club, right? So I think the impact that EAFC will have is already very big, and it's only going to increase from here. Then next question, do you think we may see more cases like Red Bull Salzburg, Red Bull Leipzig in the future? I know multi-club ownership is growing, but I am relating to more of the copy-paste clubs in different leagues by the same owners. Very good question as well. So definitely, multi-club ownership, it's quite impressive and maybe even crazy how quickly it has bloomed over the past few years. I remember 10 years ago, I was living in London, and Manchester City, had just started kind of like their internationalization project with the club expansion strategy. And then only in the past few years, you really started seeing so many multi-club ownership groups, right? So I think the cat is out of the box. I don't think there's a way to go back. I think the likes of UEFA know that and have realized that. You can see by some of the statements that they've made recently with regards to different European clubs playing in the same competition, which usually is the biggest, let's say, issue for them. But I think, again, the investors, they see the potential that football has because of its popularity, because of its global reach. And so I think, they see that there's a lot of room for improvement, a lot of clubs where things can be, centralized, it can be improved, new talent can be brought in. So I think this is definitely going to be something that we'll see more and more of. To what degree, time will tell. But already, if you look at most of the top leagues in Europe, at least, you'll see that a big percentage of them are part of multi-club ownership groups. And then, for some, it's purely for financial reasons. For others, it's also sporting reasons. For others, it's simply because they see the opportunity and think it's a good investment. But yeah, Red Bull definitely is a great example. And I know that they recently also have taken another stake at Leeds United. So again, it seems that the appetite is still there. It seems that the valuations of the clubs are still such that it makes sense for them to invest. So I think if you follow the trends a little bit, you'll understand that this is still far from over. All right, and with that, I think we've covered all the questions. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for the great questions. I hope you all learned something new today, and that you can go back to your clubs and hopefully talk with your colleagues to see how you can take your internationalization strategy to the next level. Thank you.